Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 842. I had the white pieces and start off with c4, the English opening. Here we can look at this in the opening book. And my opponent goes with e5, the reverse Sicilian setup. So I go g3. When I see that setup, I'm just placing my pawns here, and I'm going to follow up with the knight and the bishop. And that's a flexible setup. So I can recommend that even if you're not playing for the Botvinnik system like I am, because it's pretty flexible and can lead to other setups as well. So anyway, he continued with knight f6, the main move. I go knight c3, so we're all following pretty well-trodden paths up to this point. But here, the main move is really bishop to b4. And that's sort of pinning that pawn in advance and maybe planning to take it off as part of a strategy to get some pressure on the light squares. And so that's a reasonable way to play. There's another way to play, which I thought was kind of interesting, which was d5. I looked at this a little bit. It prevents white from getting to a Botvinnik setup, so that's something to think about. Although I think white still gets a comfortable position out of this. The line goes knight back to b6. This knight comes out, and this knight goes to c6, defending that pawn. So white has got decent development here. It's not the Botvinnik system, because that would have the pawn on e4 and the knight on e2. But this pawn is prevented from coming forward at the moment by this knight. Black's knights have been pushed over to the side, so seems good for white. I'll probably continue with d3 and open up a diagonal for the bishop, and also stop any future ideas of that pawn coming forward. Black has some advantages here too. First of all, he has open lines for both his bishops. He has a little more center control. And his pawn structure is very solid. His only kind of weird feature is those two knights over on the queen side. So seems like that's okay. Anyway, for both sides, let's go back to the game. Here he played a6, and we're just out of the opening book. So I just continued with my setup. He lets me get to it. I didn't want to play e5 immediately because of e4. I didn't want to play e4 immediately because of knight to g4, but actually that's a mistake in my thinking. Of course, the queen is covering the g4 square after e4, so I could have just played it right here. Instead, I played h3, which is part of my setup anyway, but not necessary at this point. He went to d6, and now I go e4. So after d6, I do have to worry about the knight coming into g4, so that's why, h3 might have been played in any case, but just right at that point it wasn't necessary. I also wanted to mention that the chess engine really thinks I should play e3. It prefers that over the Botvinnik system, and it makes a lot of sense. I think if I was to choose the optimal move in this position, that's probably it. It's preparing for d4 and kicking that bishop back, gaining a tempo on it, and it makes a lot of sense. But anyway, I was going for the Botvinnik system, which is okay. It's just not the best move there. So he castled. I went knight e2. He went bishop e6. And I went d3. And so now this has completed the setup, except for, well, I castle on the next move, so let's take it forward. He went knight c6, a pretty logical move, eyeing this hole on d4, which is part of the Botvinnik setup. I was wondering during the game about the move queen d7. The idea of queen d7 is to put pressure on that h3 pawn and prevent me from castling. But it seems like f4. I looked at this with the chess engine. f4 seems to be a good response, threatening to shut down the bishop and queen on that diagonal, even trapping the bishop in this case. And if he takes, then I can take back with a pawn and renew the threat. So it seems like that's good for white, actually. So queen d7 is not really the best move here. And the way he played is quite reasonable. Knight c6, looking at that hole. And then I castled here. And at this point we can say the Botvinnik setup is complete. I've got this pawn triangle here. I've got the two knights, and I've got the fianchetto bishop. And we'll see it develop in kind of a typical fashion. Let's see. So he goes knight to d4, putting his knight on a good square. I go bishop e3, often where you want to place that bishop. And now he just took. I think if I was playing black here, I would try and maintain that knight there for a while And eventually white will probably trade it off and there will be a pawn there. But that pawn is also restricting white's pieces, keeping them out of these squares c3 and e3. So there's some value to having even a pawn there. But he avoided all that by exchanging. So he took and then played b6. So I guess he didn't want me trading his bishop off. I think taking on c5 is not really a threat, even if he has to take back with the d-pawn, because well, his d-pawn plus his e-pawn will clamp down on that d4 square, and this file will be open. He'll be able to get some pressure on d3 there. So I really wouldn't worry about that. I don't think that bishop really needs the defense. Anyway, he went b6. I went to king h2, just so the queen can't jump to these squares with tempo on h3, and that's often a good square to put the king on before pushing the f-pawn forward. It takes it off of this diagonal. Let's see, he goes knight d7. I thought this was to clear the way for the f-pawn to come forward. It's often an idea for black to charge forward like that, but maybe his idea was just to defend the knight and prevent any kind of pawn damage on the queen side, because he never really played f5. So it's my turn. I get in this f4 push, and this is a typical way to get some play out of the Botvinnik system. You want to bust up the center a little bit and maybe even push the e-pawn forward and free up this bishop here, which I should have taken back with the pawn here. Well, first of all, let's say what black should have done. Black should have just defended with f6 and held on to things and try and keep this center solid, and that helps keep my bishop shut in. But he took, and here, oh, let's back up. He didn't play f6, he took. And here, I should have taken back with the pawn. This is really a lot stronger. You know, I have control over these center squares, and I can get something going on the G file against his king, and it just looks like this should be fine. The chess engine wants the line to continue like this, exchanging on e3 and then playing f6 here. I suppose that's to slow down the e5 push, but I play e5 anyway, getting a tempo on the rook. So anyway, after e takes f4, I took back with the bishop, which is sometimes a good way to play it. I mean, the advantages of this move are that it leaves this pawn cover in front of my king, and it moves this bishop to a potentially active square, particularly if this c-pawn ever comes forward, then I'll be trained on the d-pawn there. But, well, the bishop, as we saw in the game, can be chased away from that square, so maybe not so great. Anyway, he went bishop d4, and now this is the first time I've had a chance since the exchange, right? Starting here, he took, and then I had to take back somehow, and then he moved. And so now this is the point in the game where I have a chance to push this pawn forward with tempo. And I really should have thought about it. I didn't really notice this until after the moment had passed. The chess engine does not think it's a particularly great move here, although it does seem to win the exchange. Well, let's just say the chess engine prefers to give up the exchange over moving that rook away. I guess that would give up a pawn. So, so the chess engine plays like this. It takes the pawn, gives up the exchange here, and then this pawn is well defended, so my bishop has to retreat. And so black has, in exchange for the, in compensation for the exchange, he has the bishop pair, and he has a pawn. He has an extra pawn. So that's enough to give black an equal position. And it seems like a pretty decent position for those bishops. There seems to be a fair amount of open space for him. So not a bad way to play for black. So e5 is not the best move for me here. But I didn't think about it, so I really should have thought about that during the game. Anyway, I wanted to play my rook to c1, sort of finishes off my setup, and now I can move the my queenside pawns forward. Let's see, he went rook to b8, and then, yeah, I went b4. And he goes knight to e5. So just bringing his pieces forward, and I go knight to d5. I was trying to induce some weakness. For example, if he pushes the c-pawn forward to chase my knight away, maybe I can turn this d-pawn into a weakness. But he doesn't do that. He plays knight back to g6, chasing my bishop. And then right here, he probably should just trade. Chess Engine gives this line his best. Rook takes, queen takes, and rook to c2. C5. And then rook to c2, preparing to maybe double on the f-file. Black could try and win a pawn at this point by trading off my knight and grabbing on b4, but it doesn't look like that's such a great idea, and maybe I get play against these weak pawns. So anyway, that's how the Chess Engine would play this. He retreated his bishop to e5, and this is actually a mistake, and I should be winning at this point, but well, I keep making little mistakes on this game. So anyway, give you some tactics to think about. I pushed on with d4, so that is the right way to harass this bishop. That was the good move. He takes, and okay, now here's a quiz for you. There's actually 3 different captures I could consider. I could take the light squared bishop in 2 different ways, or I could take the dark squared bishop. And it's just a question for you if you want to think about it. Which of those captures is best? Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The Chess Engine likes c takes d5, and after I see this, then I have to agree with the Chess Engine. This bishop is still under attack, and so it's got to drop back. And then the move h4, and you can see that this bishop is really running out of squares, and this pawn over here is maybe supporting the d-pawn coming forward at some point. So it looks like an interesting little pawn formation for me, and also it really limits the motion of Black's bishop. And Chess Engine gives White a big edge after that, a winning advantage really. So you see, I took the other bishop. Let's see, what did I play here? D takes e5. Yeah, I took the dark squared bishop. And so that was the one I would have had an easier time of playing against. So now he gets to preserve his light squared bishop. And yeah, it seems like it's just the better piece. So I should have thought of taking that other bishop, and also taking with the c-pawn to, I guess, open up the c-file for my rook and have more pawns in the center. Anyway, he takes back. Oh, I kept taking here. Yeah, I sort of realized after this capture that things weren't turning out as well as I thought they would. I thought I was still going to have some pressure on this d-pawn, but he can take back with the queen. I think I missed that when I was thinking about this. And so, and his queen comes out and hits the b-pawn. Let's see, b5 is slightly preferable to the move I played, which is a3, just defending it. And then he goes queen to e6. Go bishop to d4. I'm just trying to get my pieces onto good squares. And here, let's go forward. This is kind of a long game, and nothing really horrible happens here. I thought I was in a bit of trouble with this pressure on my d-pawn, but the Chess Engine thinks I am okay so far. It actually liked this move, rook f5, which did take me a while to find that move. But it seems like that's the best move in the position. And f6, defending the knight, and doubling rooks. He goes bishop d7. Then I dropped back. So I was just a little too quick to give up on my idea here. But the Chess Engine says I should really take the knight, and he takes back with a pawn. Actually, no, I take it back. I think this position is not as good as the Chess Engine does. The thing is, this structure here is kind of an interesting pawn structure known as the ram structure, when you have 2 isolated pawns hitting against each other, butting heads, as it were. And you have to, it's a fixed structure because the pawns are isolated, so there's no pawn breaks to soften it up. And so it's all about the pieces, and can the pieces activate and play around those that fixed structure in the center. And my bishop here, that's a key piece, is blocked in behind my pawn, whereas his bishop has a potential to be active and to be attacking my pawn. So I think this structure favors black in this particular case. So I would not be so quick to go for this. So dropping my rook back at this point is okay. let's see, and then he went rook f8, and I went queen b2. Yeah, so this is a blunder. See if you can spot the tactic here. Okay, yeah, having pointed that out, you should have immediately noticed that there's a fork. So, yeah, I guess I was a little sloppy here. Anyway, he was too. He was thinking, and I was thinking as well. We were both thinking along the same tracks. The knight coming into this protected square, putting pressure on my a-pawn, and he just went ahead and played that. Let's see, and I had to move my queen again. And then he went rook d to b8. Rook b to d8, okay. And I went rook to f4. He went rook d to e8, so a little bit of shuffling here. And then he went c6. So h6 is the move that should be played here. And after c6, I have another chance. And this is very typical and the kind of thing you want to look for when you're playing with this Botvinnik setup. You want to look for these pawn breaks, and here I have a chance. I just had this kind of blind spot. I didn't realize that his rook here is actually under defended. Not there. His rook here on f7 is under defended. So I can push on with g5 here. I can't take it. I will just grab that rook. So he needs to do something like knight e5. Then I can take a pawn here and take back. And then I could bring my bishop to f1 and try and activate it, maybe over here on e2. So bishop to f1 was not a bad idea, but it was mistimed. And you have to take advantage of these shots when you have them. So I just missed that idea completely. I really was thinking that this rook was protected, and there was no way for me to push forward. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say, is this is often an idea in the Botvinnik system, that you want to push these pawns forward that are around your king to soften up your opponent's king side, and you have your pieces arranged here, so your own king is pretty safe. Anyway, so after c6, that was another chance for me to get an edge. I played bishop f1, and then here he played queen e7. He should probably retreat the knight at this point. I think knight to e5 is a recommended move. He went queen to e7, and I do come out of this a pawn up. And so I have a slight edge at this point. Although it's funny, once again, the chess engine doesn't want to take here right away, but it wants to push on with e5 this time. But it's the same idea. It's taking advantage of this rook here on f7 being somewhat loose. Okay, so I took on c4. And then I have a slight edge through the next part of the game. So let's just roll through this. I don't do anything. Although I do push that pawn forward eventually, but by the time I push it forward, he's managed to bring his bishop here to protect his rook. So it's no longer a big deal. So I can kind of chase him around a little bit, but I don't get a whole lot. But I do, yeah, at this point I'm 2 pawns up, and I'm starting to think I'm pretty good. But he can get active here and get a pawn back. I didn't see any way to prevent that. And there he gets the pawn back, and I get my king to a good position. So I got some compensation out of that. I still am a pawn up, and his king is somewhat restricted. So I probably still have a winning edge at this point, but it's not so clear. There's a lot of moves between here and the final position. But there was only one point here where actually the chess engine said I had a clear win, and so we're getting to that. It's right here. So right here I pushed on with g6, and after that it seems to just be a draw. So let's look at this winning idea at this position, because I think it's kind of interesting. Now we do have an endgame with opposite colored bishops, but we also have rooks on the board, and that makes it very different. It's really a much sharper position more than it is drawish. It's only after the rooks are off that the opposite colored bishops become kind of drawish. And so it's all about how well you can coordinate. And I do have his king somewhat limited as to where it can go. It can't really come forward here because it hangs the bishop. So I can move my rook here. Let's see. He went rook to g4. Yeah, it's my turn. I can move my rook to b8. And this is the idea, is to come and give this check and grab this pawn. And it seems that there's no way to stop it. So one thing to notice is that he can't move any pawns. They're all blockaded, or if he moves them, he loses them. So so the pawn moves are out. And the king can't move. My bishop is controlling these squares. Anywhere the king goes, it will lose the bishop. So only pieces that black can move are the rook and the bishop. And if the rook moves, here's an example, then rook to b7, hitting the king. And if the king goes back, it's actually even worse. I mean, I can check and then grab this pawn with check. So that's not helping. So the king comes forward, and I can still check the king here and drive him forward, and then I can take this pawn. So I'm going to, oh, well, I think this one wins the bishop. Right. So the other way of playing is yeah, I have to win the bishop there because his bishop and rook were coordinating on the h5 square. I had to be careful of that. The other way of playing is, instead of playing rook h4, if he moves the bishop, then I can bring my rook over this way and win the pawn. So anyway, this seems to be a winning position, and after g6 seems to just be a draw. Although there is a moment of drama after this, so we're going to go forward here, fast forward, I guess, right here. Yeah, you got to be alert the whole game. So after I played rook takes a6, which is actually a pretty big blunder, there's a tactic here that black has. So can you spot the idea? Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. It is king here with check. And notice this rook is guarding all these squares. The king is guarding all of these squares. And so my only move is to bring my king forward like this. And then the rook here is checkmate. So there was actually a mate and two on the board at this point. Well, I think we were both pretty low on time. And this idea recurs. Let's see, he took here on b4, and then I dropped my rook back with check, and he still has the tactic. He can move his king with check. Kind of funny, meeting a check with another check. Let's see, I can hold off the mate for one more move this time by blocking with my rook, but then eventually it's still going to be the same situation. My king is cut off from all these squares, has to go here, and that's a mate. So twice he had that opportunity. Anyway, let's see, he went king g8 check, and so we're back to the situation where it's a draw, although with a lot of maneuvering here. So this is maybe, he didn't have to let me capture that pawn, and I get some kind of slight edge. And there is one more chance for me to have a win here, and that is coming up. And it's kind of similar to the idea I played in the game. I went here with rook to b2 to try and bring my rook in this way and force a trade, or force the rook to move away. So the chess engine starts with rook g5, kind of a mysterious move, and so it's hard to believe that all these moves are forced, but according to the engine, they're best. And so black seems to be just sort of pointlessly maneuvering his pieces around. Notice that, white. Notice that black is not really threatening to take the bishop because I can just queen at this point. So I'm free to move my rook. So my rook maneuvers around, and there it's defending the bishop. The rook comes back, and it's the bishop, and then it comes over here. So through all of that maneuvering, it seems that the rook wanted to get to this square so it can come in this way, and that's what happens. The bishop comes over to defend the rook, so when my rook comes down, if I take, he takes back. If he takes, of course, I get a queen, so he can never take. And then I can bring my king forward, and now I'm just threatening to win all his pieces here. So if I can force him to give up a rook for the pawn, this rook and bishop versus bishop is a win. So that is the way to win the game. If he gives up his bishop for the pawn, then rook and bishop versus rook is a draw. So that's why all that careful maneuvering is needed. You need to force forced black to give up his rook to stop the pawn from queening, and it seems like there was that one chance to do that. That was the only move in the game where the chess engine found that opportunity, and after this it really is just a draw. And so we just played it out here. It wasn't entirely clear to me it was a draw at first, but eventually I couldn't find any way to make progress, and so that's how the game ended. Anyway, pretty interesting, a lot of back and forth and some cute tactics. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Bye.